everybody, and welcome to Instagram Live. This is modern media, isn't it?
It really is.
And I'm very excited because we're in the office today, and I'm joined by Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman-elect from the state of Minnesota, which is really something because there are not one, but there are two Muslim American women who are in the incoming class of this United
Both
States
from the
Congress.
heartland of America.
The other,
really,
Rashida
right?
Tlaib,
Michigan.
who's from the state of Michigan. Are you still surprised? I mean, I think if you had asked somebody 10 years ago, could this happen? A lot of people probably would be skeptical. Are you still surprised that you were elected? I mean, how are you feeling right now that you've had some time to process this whole thing?
I mean, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would be surprised that I was even running for office. You know, as you know, I'm an immigrant. I came here just 23 years ago.
I know, and I'm
Yeah.
really excited to have you share your family story because it's fascinating. You're from Somalia originally, but before we get to that,
But yeah, no, I mean, so I think especially now in a very, in a time where our country is at turmoil, to have someone who comes from a country who currently is on the Muslim ban, who is a refugee and part of, right, like the fear mongering that's happening around, the politics here in this country to win an election, and not just me, but to also have my sister Rashida Tlaib joining me. It'd be really, it's a huge surprise, and I think it says a lot about the kind of electorate that exists, right? That there are people who are willing to overlook our differences and focus on the things that we have in common, and make sure that we are having discussions that are rooted in policy and using politics to create positive change in our lives.
well, let's talk about the orientation process because you spent some time in Washington, and I'm curious what that was like. How many days were you down there?
So it is essentially 2 weeks, but they were broken up. So the first week was before the Thanksgiving break, and then the second week was after Thanksgiving. And it's all of us freshmen from this upcoming class. And it is a really great opportunity to see everyone that you've kind of been watching, right? All of us have been excited about one another's races, and there's one that you're not that excited about, and you get to also meet them in person as well. And it's been fun to not only connect and create deep relationships with the ones that you have a lot in common and you're of the same political orientation, but to also get a real opportunity to develop close relationships with folks who come from the other side of the aisle.
Was there anybody that you were really excited about meeting, or that you really kind of bonded with during that period of time?
Yeah, so two that I followed their races, and of the freshman firsts that I didn't really know.
Right.
And that was Ayanna Bresley and Johanna Hayes. Both of them are the first Black woman to be elected from their respective states, from Connecticut and Massachusetts. Johanna and I have a lot in common. My family were all educators, and she's a teacher, and so I have deep love for educators. She's also a union member. I'm a union member, and so we had a lot to chat about. And Ayanna is just a fierce fighter for social justice, and someone I deeply enjoy.
How did you decide, I'm going back a bit, but why did you decide you wanted to get involved in politics?
When I was coming to this country, I really learned a lot about the kind of America that I should walk into. There are all these orientations you go through when you're in a refugee camp coming to the United States. And when I first arrived, I noticed that in this country we do a really good job at exporting American exceptionalism, and the reality of the people living in this country was very different than the one that I've heard about. And when I would confront my dad and grandfather about these hypocrisies and lies, they say, every progress this country has ever achieved came about because people were willing to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And so you could cry about it and whine about it, or you could be part of creating the America that you think we deserve.
But there's some things, so we should probably give a little bit of that, about your background,
Right.
because you escaped Somalia when you were 8 years old, escaped the civil war there.
Yes.
And then you lived in a refugee camp for 4 years.
Yes, I lived in a refugee camp in Mombasa, Kenya for 4 years.
And so you came
And then
to
we
this
got an
country
opportunity to relocate here.
when
yes.
you were 12 years old,
When I was
about,
12,
right?
Yes.
And were there things, I'm sure while there were many things that you'd like to fix in this country, I'm sure there were many things you were grateful for when you
Yes.
arrived as well.
Yes. Yes.
Tell me about some of those. And
I mean, the opportunity to go to school, right? So one of the things that was the saddest thing for me when we lived in a refugee camp and going through war was the fact that I couldn't go to school anymore. And so the one thing I was really looking forward to was having the opportunity to get an education. But what I didn't expect was that I would go to school with kids who had food insecurity, and that I would live in neighborhoods where there were homeless people and people were struggling. And so it kind of became my mission to make sure that we were getting rid of food insecurities and that people had an opportunity to be housed and people had access to healthcare.
so
all
very,
of the things, yeah.
this was when you were quite young, so you were very politically minded from an early age.
Yes. You know, going through war and growing up in Somalia, really everybody is political. We had lots of conversations living under dictatorship about my dad and grandfather's dream of someday living in a democracy and participating. And I got to help my grandfather fulfill that for the first time when I was 14, as I took him to participate in our caucuses as his translator.
Wow.
And that's where I fell in love.
With politics?
Yes.
And you were very excited, obviously, to run. How much were you motivated by the Trump presidency, though, to say this is the time?
I mean, for me, the motivation wasn't really about his presidency. The motivation was...
Because you were in politics prior to this.
Yeah.
You were in the
we
state
got elected at the same
legislature.
time, yeah. And for me, the motivation really was about this need to want to fight for the America that we deserved, right? Not just being part of a resistance to this administration, but really saying this is where we are right now and this is where we could go. Helping people understand that we haven't really fulfilled the American ideals yet. There's a different reality that people have dreamt about for a long time. And this is an opportunity for us to work towards that.
Tell me about your priorities, your policy priorities. We don't have to get completely wonky here, but I know there's some things that you really want to tackle early on. And by the way, Julia, everything okay? Can people? I don't think we're having comments on this, are we?
No, people can comment in, but
oh, sorry. Well, I thought we weren't doing comments, but if anyone has a question, by the way, for Congresswoman-elect.
I was thinking we could at the end open it up for Q&A if we have
Sure.
time. So
Sure,
I'll keep you guys posted.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to be ignoring you guys. I'm new to this. What can I say? So what are some
I should do this on my own Instagram.
No, you should. You
Yeah,
should.
yeah.
Well, we can save it and send
Alright,
it to you
wonderful,
actually, because I think maybe people would be interested. I bet. I don't think the media. It's sometimes hard to get. I was thinking as I was just talking to you, there aren't that many opportunities in traditional media to really have these kind of conversations. And that's one of the great things I think about social media is that you can kind of create the content that you want to create and give attention to the things that you think deserve attention. So thank you for doing this in our little setup here. And we do have a light, so I don't look quite as heinous as usual. Thank you, Julia, for getting that. But anyway, so let's talk about sort of some of your the policy things that you really want to tackle.
Yeah, so first up really is restoring hope in our democracy, making sure that people have an opportunity to participate, and that means making voting more accessible. I'm one of the few freshmen who have decided not to take any corporate PAC money. And so we have to make sure that we're taking money out of politics. And it's also going to be really important for us to have people trust that we are working on their behalf and not on behalf of special interests. And so once that is established,
That's a pretty tall order.
yeah. I mean, but we're ready, you know.
Are you saying that absent of campaign finance reform, you want to sort of take an individual stand and say there is a way to do this without big money,
Exactly.
even if it's not legislated?
Exactly. For me, it's really important as someone who knows what it means to live in the absence of democracy and to live in corrupt systems, to work towards making sure that we can fully access our democracy and that we can trust it. And without that, we can't really tackle any of the other issues that I want to tackle that are a priority for my district and for me personally.
So you're saying,
Which is one of those are, working on tackling student debt, making sure that everybody has access to healthcare, and reforming our immigration system. There's currently a Muslim ban that is detrimental to the relationship we have with the outside world. There's so many people who look to this country to be the guidance of human rights, the guidance of acceptance, the guidance of inclusive society, and this travel ban or Muslim ban really isn't one that accomplishes any of the things that we want to accomplish.
in fact, you issued a statement about a woman who, from Yemen, who was prohibited from visiting her 2-year-old son, who I understand is in terrible health, is in fact dying.
It's about to be taken off life support, yeah.
And so you took a position about this, and now they've lifted the ban in her case. They've given her permission to come to this country.
Yeah, we just heard that she got a temporary visa. We've been fighting all day yesterday, and working in close collaboration with the Congresswoman who represents Barbara Lee, who represents the district where this woman's husband lives and where the child is hospitalized. This Muslim ban or travel ban was implemented to keep us safe. And what it's doing now, right, is keeping mothers from saying goodbye to their dying children. It's keeping, granddaughters from coming to the funeral of their grandparents. It's keeping aunties and uncles away from the celebration of big weddings within families. And so when policies are created from people who come from a place of fear and have blind spots, we end up with policies that are counterproductive to the things we're trying to do.
What do you think are the chances of having, I know the answer to this question, but some kind of comprehensive immigration reform? I mean, it seems to me, wherever you stand on this issue, it's not working, right? And there has to be some kind of more methodical, humane, treatment and sort of system in place to deal with both the influx of refugees and also, controlling our borders in some ways, right? I mean, it seems to me that there should be some kind of intelligent policy put in place. Are you optimistic that in this new Congress that conversation can even begin to take place?
So Katie, I'm always optimistic about whatever. I think things are always achievable if the right people are in the room. And what we will have an opportunity this coming year, is to have those right people in the room to advocate. For a long time we haven't had people who are directly impacted by our broken immigration system. We haven't had people who understand how nuanced that process really is, and people who are a reminder of what this nation really is supposed to be about.
Right.
And so what I know is that there are so many of us who are going to advocate to make sure that there is a form of documentation for all of the undocumented people here, that when we are talking about folks who are monitoring and protecting our borders, that they have a mandate to do it in a humane way, that there is transparency and accountability in that process, that we are no longer going to have a system where caging of children or separating them from their families could ever take place. I think for the first time we're going to have a different conversation, and I'm excited to be part of it.
You know, as I look at you, obviously you don't look at like the typical congressperson who I've interviewed throughout my career. And in fact, your headscarf, there is something that prohibits people wearing things from their head. I just learned this.
Yeah.
That was put in place in 1837.
Right.
So can you,
87 years.
yeah, so can you, so what is that, and is it going to be an issue at all, given that whatever law or policy that was implemented, what's the status of that?
No, it's funny because when people talk about, you know, us being folks who are trailblazing or breaking of ceilings, I didn't imagine how thick that ceiling was going to be. And so before I even get sworn in, I have to figure out a way to actually even get on the floor. And it's a process that needs to happen through the rules, and you have to lift it, because for me it will be the same as having a religious test, and you know, that is unconstitutional. And this is a rule that exists within Congress, and we are in the process of lifting that.
And soon, I imagine,
Yes.
before January 3rd.
Yes.
So you're
yes.
pretty confident that
I
that
am.
will happen.
Yes, that has passed in the proposed rule changes, and it will get confirmed on the day of.
I was gonna ask you about if you've gotten any backlash, or if there's been a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment, or anti-Muslim vitriol kind of thrown your way, since your election, because obviously you went from running a local race, or you know, running for a congressional district, to suddenly becoming a national figure, and as a result, getting a lot more attention. So what has been the reaction from people, and how are you dealing with it? And maybe you haven't gotten much negative, but I think you probably have. I have to ask you about a couple of tweets.
There's a lot. But you know, it's not for me to deal, it's for them to deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the one with the problem, it's them. And so that's kind of.
Which is a great attitude.
Yeah,
On the other
yeah.
hand, you are probably, you know, as somebody who's a public figure myself, I mean, you are the target of that.
Yeah.
And so, that's a great attitude to have, but do you not respond? Do you try to educate people? I'm just curious, and by the way, how much have you gotten?
There's a lot. I mean, and there's, you know, a couple of ways I deal with it. Sometimes through a sense of having a sense of humor and taking, you know, like joking about it on social media. Sometimes it is about educating, because there is lots of misinformation, and other times it is just ignoring it, because it doesn't.
Well, it could also take up the better part of your day.
Yes.
If you let it.
And I think sometimes that is the intent, right, of that. It is to have it consume you. It is to distract you from the important work. And I am very focused in what's ahead of me, and would love to do this work with a pure heart. And so I try not to have all of that taint me.
Let me ask you, you did have written a couple of tweets that created some controversy for you. And one was in 2012, and you tweeted, you know what you tweeted, but I'll just repeat it. Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Now, a lot of people, Congresswoman-elect, which, you know,
You like the sound of that.
I just think it's very interesting, because I don't, even Congressman-elect, it just sort of sounds funny, and anyway. And I feel like I should be calling you by your first name, but I don't want to do that
Please do,
either.
please
I don't
do.
want to do that either. But, you know, people interpreted that as being very anti-Semitic. And I'm sure, obviously, you're well aware that people were very upset about that tweet. So can you just help us understand that tweet and kind of what you meant by it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the people who are upset about it have a right to be upset about it. I think that there is, you know, and some of the words I understand are used as an anti-Semitic tropes, right? And they have been. But for me, that wasn't part of my thinking or part of my knowledge. For me, it was watching the reporting of what was happening and realizing that there was a one-sided view, and this was a tweet that came out of that anger and frustration of wanting to make sure that we had that be balanced, and for there to be criticism on both sides.
Do you regret tweeting that now? I mean, here in 2018, or do you feel comfortable and stand by what you said in that tweet?
I don't regret or feel comfortable. What I feel is it was part of my feelings at the moment, and I don't have those feelings at the moment because there's nothing happening to make me feel those feelings. And I think, you know, there are times where you are regretful because it is something wrong, and at that moment I didn't think it was wrong, and so it wouldn't be
So you feel
an
comfortable.
honest. It wouldn't be an honest answer for me to say I regret it, and I don't think because you have backlash in things that you know, say things to make people feel comfortable. And so I know for me it was an expression of how I was feeling at that moment, and so that's what it is.
And there's another more recent tweet, I think, that happened when that sort of awkward meeting with, bizarre meeting actually, with Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, the president, and Mike Pence, and you tweeted, "Jesus, take the wheel." And I think it was a response to Mike Pence's sort of affect during that meeting, right? The fact that he really wasn't saying much. And a lot of critics felt that you were mocking his Christianity. And I thought I'd ask you about that and give you a chance to kind of explain what you meant by that.
This is a funnier one to explain than the last one. So this one really, you know, Jesus take the wheel is sort of an expression of exasperation in American culture, seriously, and is also the name of one of my favorite songs by Carrie Underwood, and watching him at that moment, really seeing this photo, I couldn't think of a better thing to use to express how he must have felt sitting there, wanting you know, some sort of guidance in steering that ship.
Did you hear a lot from people after you tweeted that, or was that a little bit more of a tempest in a teapot?
There's always a lot in everything that I tweet, so
Yeah.
I
So
don't
do you,
really-
I mean, are you a little, I mean, you want to be honest and authentic and direct, I imagine, to your constituents and to people in general
Right.
who follow you.
Right.
At the same time, does it give you pause about doing that very thing because of the repercussions of some of the things that you say? Are you a little more cautious and careful now that you've been elected, or do you feel like, you know what, this is me, like many of your new colleagues in the House, and this is who I am, and I'm unapologetic about that?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's important for people to be themselves as much as they can, and I think, you know, that there isn't a lot of people who are comfortable that way as politicians. And I think the public is very much interested in having politicians be as real as they can be.
Well, before we go, and I know your nice person here is telling me to wrap it up, and thank you guys for coming. But I wanted to ask you about impeachment. There seems to be a lot of different opinions about should President Trump be impeached? Is it premature to even discuss this until the Mueller report comes out? Would it embolden President Trump and actually help him if Democrats in the House move to do that? And I just sort of am curious for your point of view about everything that's swirling around the president and all these investigations. I think I read recently there's something like 70 different investigations. So how are you feeling about that?
I mean, this president and his administration is almost self-destructing, and I think every single day there's a new report, there's a new arrest, there's new sentencing, there's a new investigation being opened, and I feel very confident and comfortable in knowing that it's not going to be whether an impeachment will happen, but when and how that process happens.
And when do you think that would be? I mean, it's hard to predict.
I don't know. It's going to depend on where this information lands.
And of course, then the Senate has to vote to convict. So, do you worry that do you worry, because I think there is kind of a calculation here, right? That it will hurt Democrats and help the president if you go through with that.
Really, for me, this is not a partisan issue, and it's not about a party, right? It's about our nation. It's about saving the republic. It's about steering this democracy in the right direction. And so I know that that this issue has become politicized, but it's not for me. And there are a lot of people who feel that way.
So you don't feel that a political calculation should even be part of the equation?
No, not in this situation. This is about making sure that we are respecting the role of a president, that there is respect for who occupies and who's worthy of occupying the White House, and that we are watching out for the public who's watching and for the generations to come, that they understand that we didn't put our politics before this nation, that we didn't worry about securing our re-elections and watch this country self-destruct, that we did everything that we could to make sure that there was accountability and transparency, and that we saved this nation.
Well, Ilhan Omar, thank you so much for coming by and talking to us. I feel like we didn't get a chance to really do any questions from
No, but it's all positive. People are loving it.
who are listening to this. So I can say to everyone, thank you all for being with us. It was really fun to talk to you and get to know you. And gosh, how long did we talk for? Like 20 minutes? Am I in trouble? I am so sorry. I said like 10 minutes. We'll just take 10 minutes. But it's really fun to get to know you and to hear from you. And I'd love to talk to you again. And I think the story of your childhood and how that really shaped your perspective, and what that was like to be an 8-year-old girl to flee your country in the midst of a civil war, and to spend those 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya, you said, yes? And then to finally have an opportunity to come to the United States. I think it must give you such a different and unique perspective, and that's what we really need, I think, representing this country, a whole panoply, I like that word, panoply, a whole panoply of perspectives, and it's alliteration too. So that we really do hear a host of
No, I mean,
ideas.
our new Congress really is going to look like America, and it's really exciting to know that it is not only going to be a representation of the beautiful diversity of this country in just race or gender, but it's going to be of experience and background.
Right, I think diversity of
everything else
experiences
that matters.
is
Yeah.
so important, right?
Right.
And what's
And the hope is that it will translate into policy that is more impactful for the American people.
before we go on a less earnest note, what is the weirdest thing that happened to you when you went to Washington? Like the weirdest encounter, or the funniest thing that happened to you, or the weirdest thing you ate, since I'm kind of obsessed with food right now, I'm kind of hungry.
I ran into Congressman John Lewis and started
He's
crying.
remarkable. You did?
And I went up to him and I said, "Sir, I read about you in middle school and now I get to be your colleague."
did he say?
And he said,
Security.
"Welcome." No. He said, "Welcome."
Yeah.
And so it is, going there and interacting with people who are such historic figures. And people who I've admired, right? Like there are people like John Lewis, but there's also the first woman to be the Speaker of the House, is essentially one of our colleagues.
Did you have
now.
fun talking to her?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and it's marvelous, right? To know that, like just 20 years ago, I was crossing the Arlington Bridge to start a new life here in the United States, and now I get to be a member of Congress, and so it is. It's
I was
one
going
of
to say
those-
only in
It's one of
America.
those moments. Only in America could that happen.
Anyway,
Yes.
thank you so much. Really great to meet you. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.